Hi everybody, my name is Danielle Nicole. If you enjoy beauty, fragrance, or makeup, then you are definitely in the right place. For today's video, I am super excited. Kayali not only released one, but actually two new fragrances called The Wedding. So I do have here two samples, and actually I do have a full bottle on the way if that gives you any sort of a hint. So this is called the Wedding Silk Santal 36. And this one is called the Wedding Velvet Santal 35. So if you're excited to hear my thoughts about these two new Kayali fragrances and enjoy the video while you're watching, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, and let's get started right now. Alright, so I do have to let you guys know it is about 90 degrees today, and I only have a teeny tiny little AC unit. I mean, it barely makes a difference. I do have it running, so I apologize if you can hear it in the background. It is just way too hot for me to turn it off. But anyways, let's get into my thoughts. So I must say, I do have to give hats off to Mona. This is a pretty creative launch. I don't think any other brand has ever launched a him and hers as far as a wedding collection goes. So once again, the her, or the one that Mona created for herself, is called the Wedding Silk Santal 36. And then the one Hassan dipped his hands into is called the Wedding Velvet Santal 35. Now both of these fragrances are actually named after the outfits they wore on their wedding day. So this one is the silk and this one is the velvet. So as you can imagine, Mona decided to wear a silk dress on her wedding day and Hassan wore a velvet suit. So pretty unique in my opinion. Now if you are a fan of Kayali, then you know the number on the bottle represents the number of formulations it took to create the perfect scent according to Mona. Now that did play a part in the numbers, however for this launch, it was more about their ages. So when they got married, Mona was 36 and Hassan was 35. Now I will say, just like with most of Kayali's launches, I was super excited to test these out. However, the one thing I have noticed with Mona's descriptions, they don't always translate the way I interpret them. And of course, fragrances are subjective, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. Now I have tested both of these fragrances out on a bladder card and also my skin, but keep in mind this is just my initial impression. I do find that when you have the actual bottle, sometimes you can have a little bit of a different interpretation. But let's get started with the Velvet Santal 35. Now these are both supposed to be intense concentrations, which you can see based on the diamond on the card here. So when you open it up, in real life, the Wedding Velvet Santal bottle is all matte black. And I believe this is the first time Kayali has done an all matte finish as far as their actual bottles go. So the bottle is absolutely gorgeous. So let's first get started with the key notes. So the key notes are jasmine petals, tea leaves, white musk, cedarwood, benzoin, and sandalwood. Now, if you didn't know, sandalwood was actually the inspiration note because it is part of Hassan's heritage. So both of these fragrances really revolve around the key note of sandalwood. So I do find both of these fragrances translate just a bit different on the skin. So for this review, I do want to start off with the bladder card. So let me spray this again. So I remember the first time I smelled Velvet Santal. Now I know to describe a fragrance as having a velvety texture, it may sound a little bit odd, but that is exactly what I get. This fragrance definitely has a velvety undertone. I know it's so hard to explain, but it does remind me of the fabric velvet. Now the other thing I was quite surprised about is I do find this fragrance is quite sweet. Now it's not as sweet as say most feminine leaning fragrances, but it does definitely have a sweet undertone that I find quite strong. Now, the other thing that I was really surprised about is I don't find a Velvet Santal to be an extremely masculine fragrance. Now, yes, if I had to put a gender to it, I would say a Velvet Santal definitely does lean masculine, but it's not quite as masculine as I was initially expecting. Now, this fragrance is incredibly smooth. Now, whenever I see cedarwood and sandalwood, and especially masculine leaning fragrances, I sometimes get a bit nervous, especially with sandalwood. Now, I am a fan of most sandalwood when it comes to fragrances. However, I do find sometimes sandalwood can have kind of a pickly or dill undertone, but I do not find that in this fragrance whatsoever. It's very smooth, a little bit sweet, and a bit musky. Now, I was actually expecting this one to have much more of a tea scent to it. I don't find this fragrance really gives off a ton of tea. Now, I do get a jasmine vibe for sure, but it's not the jasmine that I'm used to, say, in Mugler fragrances, for example. It's not indolic, it's not super strong. And again, it's just incredibly smooth. Now, to my surprise, the benzoin in this fragrance really does come to the surface right away. And I do find it stays there all the way through the dry down. Now, in my experience, sometimes benzoin can almost give off a vanilla-like undertone with a bit of sweetness, and that is definitely what I get in Velvet Santal. I must say, there is something so comforting and so warm about this fragrance. If I smelled this on a man, it would almost make me feel safe. Again, I know that sounds so funny, but there is just something so comforting about this scent. So it's a little sweet, a little musky. There is definitely a strong woody undertone, but again, there's just something comforting and very warm. Now, while I personally would not wear this fragrance, it is just a bit too masculine for my taste. I can definitely see this fragrance being pulled off by both men and women, especially if you are the type of woman that likes just a hint of masculine undertones. I think this fragrance would be beautiful on any gender. Now, the first thing I did upon spraying this fragrance, because I was quite impressed, even though it's nothing groundbreaking, it is a beautiful fragrance. Yes, it might be a bit mass appealing, but it is so beautiful. The first thing I did was I went and sprayed this on my man, and I asked him what he thought. And you guys know I'm always going to be honest with you. He was not a fan of Velvet Santal. Now, he is not into super niche fragrances or overly complex fragrances. Not that Velvet Santal is super complex by any means, but if I had to pin it down, I think the reason he's not the biggest fan of this fragrance, it's just too sweet for his personal preferences. So overall, he was definitely not a fan of Velvet Santal, but I am. I would love to smell this on a man and really on women as well. I am seriously melting, you guys. Next, let's move on to the fragrance Mona created for herself called the Wedding Silk Santal 36. And let's go over the keynotes. So the keynotes are sparkling champagne, white freesia, pink praline, lush nectarine, sandalwood, and sugared musk. So let's give Silk Santal a couple of sprays here. Now, I know many people are comparing this fragrance to Vanilla 28. You guys, I just don't find these two fragrances are very similar. Yes, they're both sweet. With Vanilla 28, I find it's much more of a boozy, almost ambery balsamic, very sweet brown sugar fragrance with a hint of florals. I just find this one gives off a completely different vibe. So the first time I sprayed Silk Santal, immediately what came to my mind was, you know, when you go to weddings, they hand out those different colored candied almonds. They almost look like different colored Easter eggs. This is exactly what this fragrance smells like. Very creamy, sugary almonds. So I was quite surprised. I was really expecting that champagne note to come to the surface immediately. And I really don't get anything super effervescent or super uplifting as far as the champagne note goes. Now, perhaps other people will pick that up more, but that is one thing I was really looking forward, is this fragrance having a much stronger champagne note, but I don't find it's very strong at all. Now, I think the reason that my nose is getting sugared candied almonds is definitely from that sweet pink praline. Now, it doesn't have a super strong nutty undertone by any means, but to my nose, that praline is very creamy, very smooth, quite sweet, and my nose definitely picks that note up the most. Now, in addition to that creamy, sweet praline, I definitely pick up sugared musk. This is definitely a very musky fragrance. Now, there's nothing animalic about it, nothing even very clean. It's just very creamy, very smooth, and quite sweet, but I would say you definitely do have to be a fan of musky fragrances. Now, the lush nectarine note, I find this is quite interesting. I was really expecting a sweet, juicy nectarine that you cut open and you have the fresh juices just dripping off of your mouth, but that is not what I get. It's almost like a candied nectarine, or one that has been cooked down with a bit of a syrupy base. Now, I would definitely not describe this fragrance as a floral forward fragrance, say that 10 times fast. So I don't find that white freesia is very strong, at least to my nose. So again, very creamy, very sweet, a bit sugary, and I definitely do get a fruity undertone from that nectarine. Now, the one thing I must say I was just a bit bummed about is I was really looking forward to that sparkling champagne note. I don't have any fragrances that have that note in it, so I was super excited. And I almost was expecting something effervescent, if you will, but I really don't get much of that champagne note whatsoever. Now, I'm sure it's there to help round out the fragrance and keep it from being overly cloying, but I did just want to mention, if you are expecting a super bubbly fragrance, I definitely don't get that. It's much more creamy and almost candied-like. Now, funny enough, if you had told me that tea or jasmine tea was a note in either of these fragrances and I had to guess which one, I would definitely guess that the tea note is actually in SILK SANTAL, because I don't find the tea note in this one. I really don't pick it up at all. But with SILK SANTAL, there's almost something very light and tea-like in it. So even though I wouldn't describe SILK SANTAL as being something incredibly unique, I do think it is a gorgeous, beautiful, almost everyday, very feminine-leaning fragrance. Now this one, definitely to my nose, is quite feminine. So if you typically do lean towards sweet or feminine-leaning fragrances, I would definitely recommend SILK SANTAL over the Velvet. Can you guys hear it thundering and raining right now? All of a sudden it decided to just completely downpour. We are getting thunder and lightning, so let's quickly wrap this up. So I did end up ordering a bottle of SILK SANTAL over Velvet SANTAL. I'm really happy I decided to test these out because I almost ordered both of them, and being that my man's not a fan of this one, SILK SANTAL is definitely the one for me. So if you are a fan of floral gourmands, fruity gourmands, or sugary fragrances in general, I definitely don't think you can go wrong with SILK SANTAL. Now I do think this is a very crowd-pleasing fragrance. Again, nothing super over the top or extraordinary, but I am going to be excited to add this to my collection. Alright you guys, it is downpouring right now, so hopefully you can hear this quick outro. Definitely let us all know in the comments down below, have you tested out either of these fragrances? If you did, which one is your favorite, or did you decide to pass on both of them? Let us know all of your thoughts down below. And don't forget, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a big thumbs up. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye guys!